Moving right along, let's talk about different properties of the fascia. Let's start with hydration. I've spoken or alluded to this quite a bit, but hydration is so important for our tissues. This is what allows for the communication to happen, the movement of blood and lymph and toxins and all the waste products and signaling. So this is where the body understands itself and the outside world. So very important for communication. And it allows for the gliding and sliding of everything in our body. The best way, I think, to think about what hydration does for the system is to think of a dehydrated system, right? It'd be creaky, it'd get stuck, it would be slow, it would be, think of like a drying out riverbed versus a thriving, vibrant river, right? There's there's life to it. There's communication. There's just that movement and that fluidity versus a really stagnant creek. It's going to be dry and slow, and there's not going to be as much life to it, right? So the fascia really depends on fluids to serve its function. Remember, a hydrated system allows for compression. We can take stress, we can take pressure in the system, and it allows for just the movement and the mobility in our tissues. It gives us structure and protection as well. We see when the tissues are hydrated that there's fast signaling, so quick communication. Toxins are able to be eliminated from the system quicker. There's more like resilience. Again, it's a pressurized system, so there's more resilience to the tissues, and there's the ability for blood and lymph to move as well. So, and elasticity, which is really important. Again, the ability so think of, okay, so this is a nice hydrated system. If I let go, it goes right back to where it's supposed to be. Thank goodness, right? It's highly elastic. But if you think of someone maybe really old and you pulled on like their elbow or part of their body, it might take a couple seconds for it to then go back to its original shape, right? It's not as hydrated, it's a drier system. So we don't want a dehydrated system. There's going to be less pressure, more friction, more cross links and adhesions. So remember I gave you the example of a tennis player or a pitcher. So there might be lots of strength because of the collagen, which is great, but there's not going to be the same fluidity. It would be more like that dried up creek than a flowing, vibrant river. So the nerve signaling might not be the same. There's probably going to be some cross links and some adhesions and trigger points in that area, which is not so functional and doesn't feel as good. So one of the things too that I really think of when I'm doing my movement practices, especially yin, by the way, yin is such an amazing way to work with the fascia. And I won't have time to get into it too much here. You can do my yin course if you're interested to learn more. But what we do in yin is where we take a pose and we hold it for a length of time. So remember, I brought this up before because it helps to communicate with the system and say, hey, we want to organize you in this way. This is where we want the collagen to be, or how we want the collagen to be laid down. And what it also does, what yin also does, along with myofascial release, along with gua sha, along with all these other practices, which is really amazing, but what it does is it also compresses the tissues as well. Remember I brought up hyaluronic acid and the glycosaminose glycans, which are really hydrophilic, so they draw water into the tissues. Well, think of them working like a sponge, okay? if the sponge is full of, imagine, okay, so you are doing your dishes and you let them soak, and then you go to bed at night and you forgot to, unless you soak your dishes overnight, I don't know, some people do that, but you forgot to finish it up at the end of the night, and you've left your sponge in the dishwater, okay? The next morning it's going to be full, but it'll be full of like shit. Like, ew, ew. It's been in that dirty water all night and full of bacteria, right? The equivalent to tissues in the body that have been stagnant, not really moving, they're highly viscous. What are you going to do with that sponge? Don't say throw it out in the garbage, because it's still useful. You would wring it out. And then you would put it under clean water. It's the same thing when we compress the fascia. So it's stagnant, it's full of stuff, whatever. We want to compress it. We want to move it. Again, gua sha, cupping, yin, any sort of movement, really massage for sure. Myofascial release, all those things is compressing the tissues, the equivalent of wringing out the tissues. And then we let it release, and that's when the equivalent of the release would be stop gua shaing, take the cups off, come out of your yin pose. Then the hyaluronic acid goes, yay, and it pulls in all the water into the tissues, the equivalent of the sponge getting fresh water put on it, okay? So then there's like a flush that sort of happens on a small scale, of course, but you can feel it. If you've held a lunge for 5 minutes and you come out of it, you can feel that. Well, maybe not, maybe that's just me, but you can feel this like this movement, right? So I always say, we come out of a pose in yin, it's like pause, like be present with the afterglow of that, because so much is happening. There was a study done, it was on pig fascia. I think this was done a few years ago in Australia, I think. So what they did is they did the equivalent of all the things I was just talking about on the fascia. So they compressed the tissues, essentially. They squeezed out the fluids of the tissues, and then they saturated it in fresh fluid, whatever it happened to be. And they found that immediately after, water started rushing back into the tissues, but it also lasted for up to 3 hours. So 3 hours later, water was still being pulled into the tissues. So this is how we want to hydrate the system. Remember, I said it's not just about drinking water. Of course, that plays a part. You can drink water all you want, but if you're not moving, if you're really sedentary, if whatever, there's parts of your body that aren't being moved, or there's adhesions or whatever, scar tissue, the tissues aren't able to push out. The sponge isn't being able to be wrung out, right? We want to wring out all the tissues through, again, myofascial release, Pilates, massage, weightlifting, whatever. We want to move and especially compress the tissues. This is why massage is so good. And yin yoga is so good. So again, if you think about this, if we bring this into the context of a yin class, think of, anything, a twist, a lunge. Think of a lunge, okay? Your left leg is forward. We're compressing the front of the thigh and the hip flexors, okay? So we're doing the equivalent of wringing out the sponge, and we hold it. Then we release. We come out of the lunge, and then our tissues act like a sponge. Water goes back into those tissues. So compression is, it's a great thing. It's a really important thing for our tissues. I think that's all I have to say about hydration, so let's leave it there. And we're going to talk about fascial wave and crimp and directional stress next.